Hi everyone. In this video, I just want to give you a quick update about some of the recent assignments you've done, particularly the ones that addressed quantitative versus qualitative research. So there were two assignments, or there was the one assignment and the group discussion I want to talk about. So in the first assignment, people did a fine job, brought up some interesting points and some interesting questions about the two excerpts that you read from the Pew Research Center, and highlighted some good information about how you knew it was a quantitative versus a qualitative study. So I just want to highlight a few of those things. Many people mentioned numerical information itself, or charts or graphs. Some way of displaying the results was evidence that it was quantitative research, the first excerpt. Many noted that it was a survey, and most of the time surveys are quantitative in nature, and that it offered like a broader look at the issue overall rather than a more in-depth look. So here's just one quick quote from an assignment. Another indicator was that they used a survey. And one of the important things I think this comment draws our attention to is that the survey allows them to control the outcomes of the research. So with a survey versus, say, an interview or a focus group, you have a lot more control over the results, namely because you've probably provided a number of options, and the participants can choose from those options, but there's not a lot of space to stray super far off script. That control actually is what lends itself to quantitative information, because if I only have a limited number of choices, I can assign them numerical positions, and I can figure out the results numerically. Whereas if people can say whatever they want, it becomes a lot more difficult to address that in a quantitative format. But also some of the people pointed out as one of the drawbacks of this is it doesn't give us a sort of deeper explanation. So it can tell us broadly what people said, but it can't tell us sort of why they said that. When identifying the qualitative study, people noted that they were focus groups and interviews rather than surveys, that the evidence used was not numerical data but quotes from the interviews themselves. This is very indicative of qualitative work, and that it provides much more in-depth look rather than sort of a broad look. So I liked this quote in particular for kind of highlighting the differences in qualitative versus quantitative. This author noted that gaining this deeper understanding through these interviews gave the numbers more meaning, showed a little more of how and why teens were using this method of communication rather than just that they were using. So one of the drawbacks of qualitative work more generally is that while it can give us a little bit more in-depth perspective, tells us a little more about the how and the why, it might not be applicable. They're usually much smaller studies, and they might not have the same kind of breadth or applicability across large segments of the population that quantitative research does. I think people did a really great job with identifying those two things and highlighting some of what they learned and questions that they still had. But there was more confusion when people offered their own research questions and told me whether they would call these qualitative or quantitative. So just very briefly, I think one thing that is helpful here is that oftentimes quantitative research is asking sort of what questions. You know, what technologies are students using or are teens using to communicate with their significant others? Whereas qualitative research methods tend to ask questions of more along the lines of how or why. Now, this isn't clear-cut or always the case. We could ask a what question and do a qualitative use qualitative methods, but oftentimes this is the case. So I think it's helpful to think about it in this way. And that's true also of the group discussion that happened this week. I think thinking about the what versus the how or the why is also useful here. I really liked the discussion. I know we only had one poster this week, but I thought that the comments from the respondents were really good. A lot of great questions, good suggestions and ideas. So the original post offered 2 research questions and suggested 2 methods. The first research question, what consumer does this commercial appeal to? And the method chose was a survey. And the second question, how do these phrases, work hard and hardworking, portray American car buyers? And the method was content analysis. One of the respondents stated something that is so important when you're thinking about research questions and you're thinking about how that fits with methods. And this was that, subtle differences in terminology make all the difference in the world in a question. And this is so true. So one of the ways that subtle difference matters is thinking about what is it you really want to know more about? Do you want to know more about people? Whether you call them consumers or participants or teens, do you want to know more about what they think? If that's the case, then a survey is really a great method to use. Especially if you're trying to find in a broad way, right? Not necessarily how or why a consumer might be interested in this commercial, but just what, right? Just a general what. Who does this commercial appeal to? And in this way, I would agree that a survey could be a really useful method here. Someone had suggested that the question could be more directed, like, does this commercial make you want to buy a car? And that is a very good question because you can get a very clear answer to it. But I would say that would be the kind of question you might want to include on a survey. But usually a research question is a kind of broader question like this. So if I had a survey and I asked a lot of different demographic questions about people's age, maybe their social status, economic status, maybe something about their cultural background, one of the questions I might want to ask is if the commercial makes them want to buy a car. I might ask other kinds of questions that I think get at this idea of appeal. How do I operationalize the notion of appeal? Quantify something being appealing. That's a set of questions that you're exploring this week through the readings and the PowerPoints and the discussion as well. The second one, how do the phrases work hard and hardworking portray American car buyers? Again, the terminology we might want to mess with, we might want to tweak a question like this, but I think it's obviously this question is sort of asking about the content, right? In this case, we're not necessarily asking how audiences feel about these concepts, hard work or working hard. We're asking how does the content, the terminology within the commercial shape a certain view of this American car buyer. And in that way, I think the method choice of content analysis fits really well, right? How is this idea of hard work used to construct a certain image of this particular car buyer, car owner? It's important here that this is a very different kind of question than this one. This one asks what an audience member might think or feel or do in relationship to the commercial. And this one asks a question about the commercial itself, the content itself. And in that situation, we would need to use a method that gets at the content in some way. So very good discussion. I hope you'll think about these as you move forward in the class as well. They should help you on the My Interview, content analysis assignment that you have coming up next.